Tonight, you stand at the edge of a moss-covered stone path in Kyoto, the humidity of a late spring evening settling on your skin like a second layer of clothing. The lanterns flanking the path have just begun to flicker to life, their paper walls glowing amber in the deepening twilight, and somewhere ahead, hidden behind a bend of ancient cedars, you hear the low, resonant gong of a bronze bell marking the hour. You are here because someone, somewhere, extended an invitation you couldn't refuse. A chance to witness a tea ceremony performed by a master who has spent more decades learning to pour hot water than you have spent alive. The gravel crunches beneath your feet with a sound so precise it feels almost rude, each step announcing your approach to a small wooden structure that barely qualifies as a building. It's a hut, really, with a thatched roof sagging under the weight of moss and time, and as you draw closer, you notice there are no windows facing the path, just an unadorned wooden wall that offers no clue about what waits inside. You probably won't survive this with your ego intact. The path curves one final time, and there it is, the roji, the dewy ground that separates the chaos of the human world from the stillness of the tea hut. A stone basin sits to your left, filled to the brim with water so clear you can see the individual pebbles lining its bottom. A bamboo ladle rests across the rim, and you know, without being told, that you are meant to stop here. You crouch, your knees protesting slightly after the walk, and you take the ladle in your hands. It's lighter than you expected, the bamboo smooth from decades of palms and fingers just like yours. You rinse your left hand, then your right. Then you cup water in your palm and bring it to your lips. The water is cold, shockingly so, and it tastes of minerals and roots and something else. Something that makes you think this water has been waiting here for you specifically, holding its breath beneath the stars until you arrive to drink it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You dry your hands on a small cloth you find folded beside the basin, and as you straighten up, you notice the door to the tea hut. It's not a door in any sense you understand. It's a square opening, perhaps 2.5 feet high, cut into the wall like a rabbit's entrance to its burrow. You've read about this, of course, in books you skimmed on the flight over, but reading about it and seeing it are two entirely different things. This door expects you to bow. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, physically. You will have to get on your hands and knees and crawl through that opening like a supplicant entering a temple, and the realization hits you that everything you thought you knew about hospitality is about to be gently, patiently dismantled. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't crawl through just yet. You stand there for a long moment, listening to the forest around you settle into evening. A bird calls somewhere in the cedars, and another answers, and the sound of their conversation drifts through the humid air like smoke. You think about the life you left behind to get here, the emails piling up in your inbox, the notifications buzzing on your phone, the constant, low-grade hum of obligation that follows you everywhere like a stray dog. You left all of that on a plane somewhere over the Pacific, and now you're standing in front of a hole in a wall, about to enter a world where none of those things exist. The master inside, the one who has spent decades learning one pour, is probably already seated on the tatami mats, waiting for you to figure out how to fit your 21st century body through a 16th century doorway. You check your watch without thinking, a reflex born of 1,000 meetings and deadlines, and then you laugh at yourself because time here doesn't work the way it does out there. The lanterns flicker, and you realize they're not electric, they're actual flames, burning oil, tended by someone whose job it is to make sure they don't go out before you arrive. That someone is probably inside the hut right now, kneeling in the darkness, listening to the sound of your feet on the gravel, judging your pace, your hesitation, the way you stop to check your watch. You've been judged before, in boardrooms and restaurants and on first dates, but this feels different. This feels like being judged by a force of nature, by gravity or time itself, something that doesn't care about your resume or your charm or your carefully curated social media presence. The tea master inside that hut has spent 40 years learning to pour a single cup of tea, and you have spent 40 years learning to do 100 things passably well, and the gap between those two approaches to life is about to become embarrassingly apparent. You take a breath, and the air smells of wet stone and cedar and the faint, almost imperceptible hint of charcoal smoke from a fire that has been burning somewhere inside that hut for hours, maybe days, maybe decades. The tea ceremony isn't something you schedule like a dentist appointment. It's something you prepare for, something the host prepares for, a convergence of seasons and moods and cosmic alignment that makes this particular evening the only possible evening for this particular gathering. You didn't know that when you accepted the invitation. You thought it was a cultural experience, a box to check, a story to tell at dinner parties. Now, standing here with your hands still damp from the stone basin, you're starting to suspect that the story you'll tell won't be the one you expected to bring home. You approach the door, if you can call it that, and you get down on your knees. The gravel digs into your shins through your trousers, and you can feel the dampness of the earth seeping through the fabric. You lower your head, then your shoulders, and you begin to crawl into the darkness. The opening is just large enough for your body, but only just, and for a moment you feel a flash of panic. What if you get stuck here, halfway between the world you know and a world you can't yet see? What if this is the test, and failing means spending eternity wedged in a wooden hole while the tea master sips his matcha in peaceful indifference? Your hands find the threshold, a smooth wooden lip worn concave by centuries of palms just like yours, and you pull yourself forward into the warmth beyond. You emerge from the crawl space into a darkness so complete it takes your brain a full 3 seconds to remember how eyes work. The air inside is thick and warm, carrying the scent of tatami, that particular smell of dried rice straw that somehow manages to be both vegetal and sweet, and underneath it, the faint, smoky whisper of charcoal that has been burning low and steady for hours. You're on your hands and knees on a mat that feels springy and ancient beneath your palms, and you can hear breathing somewhere in the blackness ahead of you, slow and measured and utterly unbothered by your awkward arrival. You stay still, because moving seems like a terrible idea when you can't see anything, and gradually your pupils begin to dilate enough to make out shapes, the gleam of a lacquered surface, the darker rectangle of an alcove against the wall, and finally, the silhouette of a person kneeling motionless in the center of the room. The master doesn't speak. You've been in the room for what feels like a small eternity, and he hasn't moved, hasn't acknowledged your presence with so much as a shift in his breathing. You wonder if this is part of it, if you're supposed to say something, do something, perform some ritual of greeting that you failed to read about in your guidebook. But you remember something someone told you once, or maybe you read it somewhere, that in the tea ceremony, the host waits for the guest to settle, to arrive fully, before the first word is spoken. So you stay on your knees, your back aching from the crawl, and you wait. And after a while, the waiting stops feeling awkward and starts feeling like the only possible thing to be doing. When the master finally moves, it's barely perceptible, a slight inclination of his head, a shift in the angle of his shoulders, but somehow it fills the room like a thunderclap. You realize you've been holding your breath, and you let it out slowly, trying to match your exhale to the rhythm of his stillness. A match flares in the darkness, sudden and shocking, and you watch as he touches the flame to a single candle set into an iron holder on the floor between you. The light blooms slowly, revealing the room in stages. First the master's hands, ancient and elegant, wrapped around the match until it burns down to his fingertips. Then his face, which is older than you expected, carved with lines that look less like wrinkles and more like the grain of weathered wood. Finally the room itself, impossibly small and impossibly perfect, every surface exactly where it should be. The kettle sits on a brazier to the master's left, iron and massive and black as space, and steam rises from its spout in a column so straight it might have been drawn with a ruler. You watch that steam, mesmerized, as it rises toward the ceiling and disappears into the darkness above. The master's hand hovers near the kettle, not touching it, just feeling the heat, assessing something you can't perceive. Historians still argue whether the Zen concept of mindfulness in tea evolved from Buddhist practice or from the practical necessity of not burning yourself on a red-hot iron pot. But watching this man's hand float above the steam, you understand that the question misses the point entirely. He's not being careful. He's listening. The kettle is speaking to him, telling him things about temperature and pressure and the precise moment when water becomes tea, and his hand is the antenna tuned to receive that signal. You've seen water boiled before. You've done it yourself, 1,000 times, pressing a button on an electric kettle while you scroll through your phone with the other hand. You've never seen water boiled like this, with the kind of attention most people reserve for heart surgery or the final minutes of a championship game. The master's eyes are half closed, his breathing so shallow his chest barely moves, and you get the sense that if a meteor came through the roof right now, he would continue to sit here, waiting for the water to reach exactly the right temperature before acknowledging the apocalypse. The kettle begins to make a sound, a low rumble at first, then a series of clicks and pops that you realize are the iron expanding as the heat penetrates its core. This is where the decades begin to show. Not in the master's hands, though they're steady as stone, and not in his posture, though he hasn't shifted a millimeter since you crawled in. The decades show in the way he hears the water. Most people hear boiling water as a single event. It's quiet, then it bubbles, then it's done. But this master hears layers, strata, geological ages of transformation within the kettle. There's a moment early on when the bubbles form at the bottom and rise in single file, delicate as prayer beads. Later, they come faster, clustering together like conversations at a party. Finally, there's a sound the Japanese call the wind in the pines. A sustained, breathy roar that isn't boiling at all, but the water's last exhalation before it surrenders to vapor. The master's hand moves. It's the first deliberate action you've seen him take, and it's so fast you almost miss it. His fingers close around the handle of a long bamboo ladle resting beside the kettle, and he dips it into the steam without touching the water. You blink, confused, because dipping a ladle into steam seems about as useful as dipping it into a memory. But the master holds it there, letting the hot vapor wash over the bamboo, and you realize he's warming the ladle. Not the water, the ladle. The water will be in contact with this bamboo for perhaps 2 seconds before it meets the tea bowl. And in those 2 seconds, if the ladle is cold, it will steal heat from the water, changing the temperature at the moment of impact. The master has spent 40 years learning to control variables you didn't even know existed. When he finally scoops the water, it's anticlimactic in its simplicity. The ladle dips, rises, and transfers a perfect measure of hot water into a waiting bowl. But nothing about this moment is simple, because the scoop wasn't just a scoop, it was a negotiation. The angle of the ladle relative to the surface of the water, the speed of the entry, the depth of the immersion, the pause at the apex before the transfer. Each of these micro-movements has been practiced tens of thousands of times, until they've become less like actions and more like reflexes carved into the nervous system itself. You think about the way you pour coffee in the morning, sloshing it into a mug while you squint at the headlines, and you feel a sudden, profound respect for the sheer effort it takes to be that careless. The master sets the ladle down with a click so soft it's almost subaudible, and then he looks at you. Really looks at you. For the first time since you entered. His eyes are dark and deep and utterly unreadable, and you get the sense that he's just taken a complete inventory of your soul using nothing but the light from a single candle. You want to say something, to explain yourself, to justify the last 40 years of hurried existence, but the words die in your throat because what would you even say? You've just watched a man spend 10 minutes warming a ladle in steam, and you have no framework for that kind of patience, that depth of attention. The master's gaze holds you for another long moment, and then he turns back to the kettle, and you understand without being told that the lesson has begun. The master's name, you learned earlier from the nervous young woman who arranged this visit, is Tanaka Soke, and he carries a lineage that stretches back 400 years through an unbroken chain of tea masters, each one handing down the teachings to the next like a relay race run across centuries. You try to grasp what that means, that the hands you're watching now were trained by hands trained by hands trained by hands that once served tea to shoguns and samurai. but the concept slips away like water through fingers. History, for you, is something that happens to other people, something you read about in books or watch in documentaries. For Tanaka Soke, history is the room you're sitting in, the kettle humming on the brazier, the very air you're breathing. He hasn't spoken a word since you arrived, and you're beginning to understand that speech might not be part of this particular ceremony. The tea ceremony has many forms, many variations, some of them chatty and social, some of them austere and silent. This one, you're guessing, falls into the latter category. The silence isn't empty, though, it's full, crowded with meaning and intention, every creak of the tatami and sigh of the kettle carrying the weight of conversation. You've never experienced silence like this, silence that demands something from you, silence that expects you to contribute your own stillness to the shared space. Tanaka Soke's hands move to a small lacquered container beside him, and he lifts it with the same reverence you'd use to handle a holy relic. In a way, that's exactly what it is. This container holds the matcha, the powdered green tea that is both the point of this ceremony and somehow beside the point entirely. The container is black, so deeply black it seems to absorb the candlelight rather than reflect it, and you notice the faint shimmer of mother-of-pearl inlay along its edges, a design so subtle you almost missed it entirely. The master places the container in front of him, bows to it briefly, and then opens it with a twist of his wrist that makes no sound at all. This is where Sen no Rikyu enters the room, though he's been dead for more than 400 years. You can feel his presence in every gesture Tanaka Soke makes, in the precise geometry of the space, in the very fact that you're sitting on the floor in a tiny hut instead of in chairs around a table. Rikyu was the man who took tea, a practice that had existed in Japan for centuries before him, and transformed it into something else entirely, something that combines Zen Buddhism, aesthetics, politics, and philosophy into a single, devastatingly simple act. He was the one who decided that tea huts should have tiny doors to enforce humility. He was the one who elevated the rustic and imperfect over the ornate and flawless. He was the one who made it possible for a man to spend his entire life learning to pour water, and for that pursuit to be considered worthy of a lifetime. Historians still argue whether Rikyu was a mystic or a politician, a humble servant of tea or the most brilliant operator in a murderously complex political landscape. What everyone agrees on is that he ended badly. His patron, the warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi, was a man of immense power and even more immense ego, a peasant who had clawed his way to the top of Japan's bloody hierarchy and intended to stay there. Rikyu served as his tea master for years, guiding Hideyoshi through the subtleties of aesthetics and ceremony, teaching him that power could be expressed through restraint as effectively as through gold leaf and grand castles. For a while, it worked. Hideyoshi embraced the wabi-sabi aesthetic Rikyu championed, the beauty of imperfection and impermanence. He built tea huts and collected rustic ceramics and played at being a man of refined taste. But power has a way of corrupting restraint, and Hideyoshi's ego eventually outstripped his master's teachings. The precise reason for Rikyu's downfall remains a mystery. Some say he commissioned a statue of himself to be placed at a temple gate, directly in the path Hideyoshi would take to visit the emperor, an act of breathtaking arrogance. Others whisper that he refused to let Hideyoshi marry his daughter, or that he was simply too influential, too respected, too much of a threat to a paranoid ruler who trusted no one. Whatever the cause, the outcome was certain. Hideyoshi ordered Rikyu to commit ritual suicide. You look at Tanaka Soke's hands as they lift a tiny bamboo scoop from the tea container, and you try to imagine what it would feel like to know that your art, your life's work, your decades of practice, could end at any moment by a warlord's whim. Rikyu faced that knowledge every day, and somehow it didn't break him. On the day of his death, with his patron soldiers waiting outside to ensure he followed through, Rikyu hosted one final tea ceremony for his closest friends. He served them tea, spoke calmly about the beauty of the morning, and then, after they left, composed a death poem and opened his own stomach with a short blade. His last act before dying was to arrange his tea utensils in perfect order, leaving nothing out of place, nothing unfinished. The bamboo scoop in Tanaka Sokei's hands moves to the tea container, dips inside, and emerges with a small mound of bright green powder. The color is almost obscenely vivid in the candlelight, like crushed emeralds or the first leaves of spring concentrated into a teaspoon of pure potential. The master taps the scoop once against the rim of the container, and the powder falls into a waiting tea bowl in a single, perfect pile. You realize you've been holding your breath again, and you let it out slowly, trying not to disturb the air between you and the bowl. Riku's legacy isn't just in the movements themselves, though those movements have been preserved with almost religious fidelity for 4 centuries. His legacy is in the why, the philosophy that turned a simple act of hospitality into a path toward enlightenment. He taught that the tea ceremony wasn't about escaping the world, but about engaging with it more fully, more intentionally. The tiny door you crawled through wasn't just a humility device. It was a reminder that everyone, from the mightiest warlord to the poorest peasant, must bow to enter the same space. The rough, imperfect bowls he favored weren't just an aesthetic preference. They were a meditation on impermanence, on the beauty of things that will eventually break and fade. Tanaka Sokei reaches for the kettle again, his hand moving with the same unhurried precision as before, and you watch as he ladles hot water into the bowl. The water hits the green powder and immediately begins to transform it, the bright dust dissolving into a murky liquid that swirls and settles. The master picks up a bamboo whisk, a delicate instrument carved from a single piece of bamboo into dozens of fine tines, and he begins to whisk the tea. The movement is rapid but controlled, a back and forth motion that creates a soft, rhythmic sound like wind through reeds. You watch the surface of the tea change, bubbles forming and popping, the liquid growing thicker and more uniform with each pass of the whisk. When he stops, the tea is crowned with a fine, pale foam, so delicate it looks like the surface of a cloud. The master sets the whisk down, rotates the bowl twice in his palms, and places it before you with a bow. The bowl sits on the tatami between you, steaming gently in the candlelight, and you understand that this is the moment you've been crawling toward, the moment all those decades of practice were leading to. Not the tea itself, but the offering of it, the gesture that contains within it 400 years of history and philosophy and the ghost of a man who died for his art. The bowl sits before you, and you have no idea what to do with it. This is not, you realize with a rising flush of panic, a situation where you can simply grab the cup and drink like you're finishing a coffee before a morning meeting. The master's eyes are on you, calm and patient, waiting to see what you'll do next, and you understand that this waiting is itself a test of observation, of humility, of whether you paid any attention at all to the books you skimmed on the plane. You've read about the etiquette, of course, in that distracted way you read most things, but reading about it and doing it are separated by the same gulf that separates watching someone play piano and sitting down at the keyboard yourself. You remember something about bowing. That seems safe enough. You incline your head toward the bowl, then toward the master, and you hope you're not accidentally performing some ancient insult that will get you expelled from the hut and banned from tea ceremonies forever. Tanaka Sokei's expression doesn't change, which you take as either a good sign or a sign that he's too polite to show his horror. You reach for the bowl with both hands, because you remember that too. The tea bowl is meant to be treated with reverence, held in the palm of one hand while the other steadies it, not gripped like a beer mug at a sports bar. The bowl is warm, warmer than you expected, the heat from the tea radiating through the ceramic and into your palms. It's a rough bowl, deliberately so, with uneven glazing and a slight asymmetry that your fingers register as a kind of personality. You lift it, and as you do, you notice something you missed when the bowl was sitting on the mat. A small imperfection in the rim, a tiny chip that has been filled with gold lacquer, the repair itself made beautiful and obvious rather than hidden. This is kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with precious metals, and you've read about it too, but seeing it here, feeling it under your thumb, is something else entirely. This bowl was broken once, and instead of throwing it away, someone made the break part of its story. You rotate the bowl in your hands, and the master's eyes follow the movement with an attention that feels almost physical. You remember now, you're supposed to turn the bowl before you drink, to avoid drinking from its front, the side that was presented to you. Every tea bowl has a face, a front, the side the maker intended to be seen first, and drinking from that side is considered slightly rude, like eating off someone else's plate. You turn the bowl until the little gold-repaired chip is facing away from you, and you bring it to your lips. The tea is bitter. You were expecting that, had read about it, but reading doesn't prepare you for the actual sensation of matcha on your tongue. A green, vegetal punch that tastes less like a beverage and more like concentrated spring compressed into liquid form. It's thick, too, almost syrupy, coating your mouth with a texture that feels simultaneously luxurious and challenging. You take the prescribed 3 sips, and between each sip you pause, feeling the weight of the bowl in your hands, the warmth of the liquid, the silence of the room pressing in around you. On the 3rd sip, you make a sound, a slight slurp, involuntary, the kind of noise you'd make drinking anything hot, and you freeze, certain you've committed some terrible faux pas. But Tanaka Sokei's eyes crinkle slightly at the corners, and you realize with a start that he's amused. The slurp, it turns out, is actually correct. It shows appreciation, shows that you're engaging with the tea rather than just mechanically consuming it. You've accidentally done something right, and the relief that floods through you is out of all proportion to the stakes involved. You set the bowl down between you, rotating it back so the front faces the master, and you bow again, murmuring the words of thanks you practiced in your hotel room, Gochiso sama deshita. It was a feast. The master bows in return, and then, for the first time since you entered, he speaks. His voice is soft, barely above a whisper, but it fills the small space completely. You turned the bowl correctly, he says. Most first-time guests forget. His English is precise, accented in ways that make each word a small work of art. You nod, not trusting yourself to speak, and he continues. The bowl you just drank from is 400 years old. It was made in the kilns of Minyo, during the time of Rikyu himself. The chip you noticed, that happened 50 years ago, when my teacher dropped it during a ceremony. He repaired it himself, using gold from his own wedding ring. You look down at the bowl with new eyes, trying to process what you've just heard. You've held 400-year-old objects before, in museums, behind glass, with guards watching to make sure you didn't get too close. You've never held one in your hands, never drunk from one, never felt its warmth against your palms and known that the person who made it died before your country even existed as a nation. The weight of that knowledge settles into your chest, heavy and light at the same time, and you understand suddenly why the master spent so long warming a ladle in steam. When you're handling objects like this, objects that have survived wars and earthquakes and the rise and fall of empires, every gesture matters. Every action either adds to their story or subtracts from it. Tanaka Sokei reaches for the bowl, and you watch as his hands close around it with the same reverence they've shown everything else in this room. He studies it for a moment, turning it slowly, and you realize he's not just looking at it. He's communing with it, checking in with an old friend after letting a stranger borrow it for a few minutes. When he's satisfied that the bowl is unharmed, he sets it aside and begins to rearrange the utensils, preparing for the next phase of the ceremony or perhaps just restoring order to the space. The small door you crawled through, he says without looking up. What did you think of it? The question catches you off guard, and you scramble to formulate an answer that doesn't sound completely ignorant. You tell him about the panic you felt, the fear of getting stuck, the way your knees hurt on the gravel. He nods, and you get the sense that your answer was somehow correct, or at least not incorrect. Rikyu designed that door, he says. Before him, tea was served in large rooms, to large groups. It was social, performative. Rikyu changed that. He built a hut so small that only 2 or 3 people could fit, with a door so low that everyone, samurai, merchant, peasant, had to crawl through on hands and knees. He wanted people to leave their status outside with their shoes. You think about that, about the swords that samurai had to leave leaning against the wall before they crawled through, about the elaborate robes that got dusty and wrinkled in the process of entering. Rikyū wasn't just serving tea, he was running a quiet revolution, creating a space where the brutal hierarchies of feudal Japan simply didn't apply. Inside the tea hut, the warlord and the farmer were equals, bound by the same low ceiling and the same tiny door. It's no wonder Hideyoshi eventually turned on him. A man who can make power irrelevant is a dangerous man to have around when you're trying to consolidate power. The master stands, and you realize the ceremony is over. You stand too, or try to. Your legs have gone numb from kneeling, and you wobble dangerously before catching yourself on the wall. Tanaka Soke pretends not to notice, which you appreciate more than you can express. He leads you to the tiny door, and you both crouch there for a moment, looking out at the night beyond. The lanterns are still burning along the path, and somewhere in the darkness a bird calls, the same bird you heard when you arrived, or perhaps its descendant. You realize you have no idea how long you've been inside. It could have been an hour, or 3, or the entire night. You don't leave through the tiny door just yet. Instead, the master gestures for you to return to your kneeling position, and you obey, your legs screaming in protest as you fold yourself back onto the tatami. There's more, apparently. The ceremony isn't a single act but a sequence, a progression, and you've only completed the first movement. Tanaka Soke settles back onto his cushion with the same unhurried grace he's shown all evening, and for a moment he simply sits there, eyes half closed, breathing in the silence you've created together. When he opens his eyes, they're fixed on a point behind you, and you turn to follow his gaze. The alcove, the tokonoma, occupies the far wall of the hut, a recessed space slightly raised above the level of the tatami. You noticed it when you first crawled in, registered it as a decorative feature, but you haven't really looked at it until now. In the candlelight, it reveals itself as a carefully composed tableau. A hanging scroll on the back wall, calligraphy brushed onto paper in strokes so black they seem to absorb light, and below it, a single flower arrangement in a simple bamboo vase. The flower is a camellia, white and perfect, with one fat bud just beginning to unfurl beside it. You've seen flower arrangements before, in hotel lobbies and office buildings, explosions of color and foliage designed to impress. This is different. This is one flower, one stem, one bud, arranged with such precision that it seems less like a decoration and more like a statement, a sentence written in petals and leaves. The master follows your gaze and nods slightly, acknowledging that you've finally noticed what's been waiting there all along. The scroll, he says quietly, is by a monk who died 700 years ago. The characters say peace and harmony. But that's not what the calligraphy shows. Look at the brushwork. See how the ink pools here, at the end of the stroke? The monk was old when he wrote this, his hand unsteady, and that unsteadiness is part of the message. Peace isn't stillness, he's telling us. Peace is the tremor you learn to accept. You look at the scroll with new eyes, and you see what he means. The characters aren't perfect. The lines waver slightly, the ink bleeds in places. The whole composition has a quality of fragility that you mistook for age but now recognize as intention. This monk, 7 centuries dead, reached across time to tell you that perfection is a lie, that the trembling hand is still capable of beauty, that the crack in the bowl and the wobble in the brushstroke are where the humanity lives. The flower, the master continues, is from my garden. I cut it this morning, before dawn, while the dew was still on it. I watched it all day, waiting for the moment when it would be ready to enter the tokonoma. Too early, and it would be tight, unopened, unwelcoming. Too late, and it would be past its peak, beginning to fade. The guest arrives at a particular time, and the flower must arrive at that same time, must be at exactly that moment of opening when you crawl through the door. You stare at the camellia, and you try to comprehend the level of attention this implies. The master didn't just cut a flower and stick it in a vase. He watched this specific bloom all day, tracking its progress, waiting for the exact instant when its beauty would align with your presence. The flower is a greeting, a welcome, a message that says, "I have been thinking about you all day, preparing for you, making sure that when you arrived, everything would be ready." You've never been welcomed like this. You've never welcomed anyone like this. The very concept seems almost absurd in its intensity. Historians still argue whether the tokonoma evolved from a practical feature, a place to hang a scroll in otherwise bare medieval dwellings, or whether it was always a spiritual space, a portal to something beyond the ordinary. What's certain is that by Riku's time, the alcove had become the heart of the tea room, the place where the host's aesthetic and philosophical intentions were concentrated into a single, wordless statement. The scroll sets the theme. The flower responds to the season, the guests, the particular quality of the light. Sometimes a small incense burner is added, or a single ceramic object, but always the composition is minimal, deliberate, loaded with meaning you're meant to absorb rather than decode. The flower is not for looking at, Tanaka Soke says, and you turn back to him, confused. It's for feeling. You don't analyze a flower, you experience it. The color enters your eyes, the shape registers in your mind, but the meaning happens somewhere else, somewhere below thought. Riku understood this. He said that the tea ceremony is about nothing but boiling water, making tea, and drinking it. Everything else, the scroll, the flower, the bowl, is just support, just context, just reminders of what's really happening. What's really happening? You turn the phrase over in your mind, trying to grasp it. What's really happening is that you're sitting on a floor in the dark, drinking bitter tea from a 400-year-old bowl, while an old man talks about flowers and calligraphy. But that's not what's really happening at all, is it? What's really happening is that you're present, fully present, for the first time in years. The phone in your pocket might as well be on another planet. The emails piling up in your inbox exist in a different dimension. The only thing in the universe right now is this room, this candle, this flower, this man, this moment. The master rises, and this time you know enough to stay seated. He moves to the tokonoma with the same measured steps he's used all evening, and he kneels before the alcove, bowing to the scroll and the flower. Then he reaches up and, with infinite care, adjusts the camellia by a fraction of an inch. You can't see the difference, can't perceive what has changed, but you know it matters. You know that the flower is now more itself than it was a moment ago, more aligned with some invisible standard of rightness that only decades of practice can perceive. He returns to his cushion and sits in silence for a long moment, letting you absorb what you've witnessed. Then he speaks again, his voice even softer than before. "In the West," he says, "you have a saying, stop and smell the roses. It's a good saying, a true saying. But we would say something different. We would say, become the rose. Not just stop to appreciate it, but enter into it, feel what it feels, know what it knows. When you look at that flower, you're not separate from it. You're part of the same moment, the same unfolding, the same brief bloom between darkness and darkness. You look at the camellia, and you try to become it. You feel the stem rising from the vase, the leaves unfurling, the petals opening to the candlelight. You feel the bud beside it, tight with potential, waiting for tomorrow's dawn. You feel the 700-year-old calligraphy watching over you both, the trembling strokes of an old monk's brush reminding you that everything trembles, everything shakes, everything eventually fades. And for a moment, just a moment, you feel it, not intellectually, not as a thought, but as a direct sensation, a knowing in your bones. You are the flower. The flower is you. The distinction between observer and observed has collapsed into something simpler, something more true. Then the moment passes, and you're just a person again, sitting on a floor in the dark, trying to understand something that might be beyond understanding. But the memory of that moment lingers, a warmth in your chest that has nothing to do with the tea. You understand now why the master spends decades learning one pour. It's not about the pour at all. It's about becoming the kind of person who can see a flower and recognize himself in it, who can pour water and feel the entire universe moving through his wrist. The decades aren't training, they're transformation. They're the slow, patient work of turning a human being into something that can hold a moment like this without breaking it. The kettle begins to make a new sound, a shift so subtle you almost miss it. But Tanaka Sokei's hand is already moving toward it before the change fully registers in your conscious mind. The low rumble that has been the room's background music for the past hour has evolved into something else. A softer, breathier tone, like wind moving through a distant forest. The master's fingers close around the kettle's handle, and he lifts it from the brazier with a slowness that makes the action feel like a meditation in itself. The iron vessel hangs in the air, suspended above the coals, and for a moment the new silence is louder than the sound that preceded it. "You hear that?" he asks, and you nod, though you're not entirely sure what you're agreeing to. In Japanese, we call it matsukei's, the wind in the pines. It's the sound water makes just before it boils, when the bubbles are forming at the bottom but haven't yet risen to the surface. Every kettle has its own voice, its own way of singing this song. This one has been in my family for 5 generations. I've been listening to it for 70 years, and I'm still learning to hear what it's telling me. You stare at the kettle, this ordinary-looking pot of black iron, and you try to imagine what it would be like to know something that intimately. You've owned objects for decades, a watch your father gave you, a jacket you've worn since college, but you've never listened to them, never learned their voices, never thought of them as having anything to say. The kettle hangs in the master's grip, still steaming faintly, and you realize it's not just a container for water. It's an instrument, a companion, a living presence in this small room. Tanaka Sokei sets the kettle back on the brazier with the same care he used to lift it, and he reaches for a small iron lid rest, placing it precisely on the tatami beside him. Then he lifts the kettle's lid, a separate piece of iron, fitted so perfectly that it makes a soft clink as it comes free, and sets it on the rest. Steam billows up from the opening, carrying with it the scent of hot metal and something else, something mineral and ancient that you can't quite identify. The master dips the ladle into the open kettle, and this time he doesn't pause to warm it. The water is ready, the moment is now, and hesitation would be a kind of violence against the perfection of the timing. He transfers water to the bowl in 3 ladlefuls, each one measured and deliberate, and then he reaches for the tea container again. The bamboo scoop dips, rises, transfers powder to bowl, and you watch the bright green mound settle into the hot water like a small island forming in a steaming sea. The whisk comes next, its delicate tines cutting through the liquid with that soft, rhythmic sound you're beginning to recognize as the heartbeat of this ceremony. The foam rises, pale and fine, and when the master stops whisking and rotates the bowl to present it, you realize with a start that this tea is for you again. A second serving, a continuation of the dialogue you've been having through gestures and silence. But before you can reach for it, the master does something unexpected. He lifts the bowl and holds it out to you, but instead of setting it down for you to take, he keeps it in his hands, turning it slowly so you can see it from every angle. "Look," he says. "Look at the foam. What do you see?" You lean forward, studying the surface of the tea. The foam is uniform, a pale green cap that covers the liquid completely, but as you look closer, you notice that it's not perfectly uniform after all. There are variations in the bubbles, some larger, some smaller, some clustered together in patterns that seem almost intentional. You tell the master this, and he nods. "The foam is the moment," he says. "It exists only now, only in this bowl, only because of this water and this tea and this whisk and these hands. In 5 minutes, it will be gone, the bubbles will pop, the foam will settle, and the tea will be just liquid again. But right now, it's perfect. Right now, it's exactly what it's supposed to be. The whole ceremony, the whole philosophy, the whole lifetime of practice, it's all for this. Not for the tea, not for the bowl, not for the scroll or the flower. For the foam. For this temporary, fragile, impossible perfection that exists for a moment and then vanishes forever. You look at the foam, and you feel the weight of what is saying settle onto your chest. All those decades, all that practice, all that attention to detail, for something that will disappear in minutes. It's absurd. It's the most absurd thing you've ever heard. And yet, sitting here in the candlelight, watching the bubbles slowly pop and reform, it makes a kind of perfect sense. Of course you would spend your life pursuing something that can't last. What else is worth pursuing? What else is real enough to matter? The master sets the bowl down before you, and you reach for it with both hands, turning it carefully to avoid drinking from its face. The foam meets your lips first, light and airy, almost nothing at all, and then the tea beneath it, thick and bitter and alive. You take your 3 sips, and between each one you pause, watching the bubbles reform where your mouth has disturbed them, watching the surface slowly return to its previous state. By the 3rd sip, the foam is thinner, less perfect, already beginning its inevitable decline. You set the bowl down, rotate it back toward the master, and bow. Tanaka Soke bows in return, and then he does something that surprises you. He smiles. It's a small smile, barely there, but it transforms his face, softening the lines that decades of discipline have carved into his features. You did well, he says. Most guests are too busy thinking about the next sip to notice the foam. But you saw it. You understood. He pauses, and the smile fades slightly. Do you know why the kettle sings? You shake your head, and he continues. It's not the water boiling. It's the iron. The heat causes the metal to expand and contract in ways that create sound waves. Every kettle has its own song because every kettle is made differently, with different thicknesses of iron, different shapes, different histories. This song you heard tonight, the wind in the pines, it's the sound of this particular kettle telling you that it's ready. It's been waiting for this moment all day, all year, all its life. And now it's singing to welcome you. You look at the kettle with new eyes, this black iron pot that has been sitting there all evening, doing nothing but holding water and getting hot. You've never thought of an object as having a voice, as having something to say. But you heard it tonight. You heard the shift from rumble to whisper, the moment when the water stopped being water and became tea. You just didn't know you were listening. The master reaches for a small cloth folded beside him, a square of linen so white it seems to glow in the candlelight. He unfolds it with movements so deliberate they feel like a separate ceremony entirely, each corner turned with the same attention you'd give to handling a sacred text. The cloth comes to rest flat on his palm, and then he begins to wipe the tea bowl, the same bowl you just drank from, now empty and waiting to be restored to its place in the universe of objects. You've seen people wipe dishes before. You've done it yourself, thousands of times, a quick swipe with a towel before shoving the plate back into the cabinet. This is not that. This is something else entirely, something that makes you wonder if you've ever actually wiped anything in your life. The master's fingers move the cloth across the ceramic in precise, geometric patterns. A circle here, a line there, a fold that exposes fresh linen for the next section of the bowl. He's not just cleaning. He's purifying, resetting, returning the bowl to its original state so that the next guest, the next ceremony, can begin fresh. The cloth, Tanaka Soke says without looking up, is called a fukusa. It's silk, not cotton. Silk doesn't leave lint, doesn't scratch the lacquer. This particular one was woven 40 years ago by a woman in Kyoto who spent her entire life making nothing but fukusa for tea ceremony. She died last year, at 97. She was still weaving until her hands couldn't hold the thread anymore. You look at the cloth with new respect, this simple square of silk that has just become a memorial to a woman you'll never meet. The master's hands continue their work, wiping the inside of the bowl first, then the rim, then the outside, each section receiving the same focused attention regardless of whether it ever touched the tea. When he reaches the foot of the bowl, the small ring at the bottom that lifts it slightly off the surface, he pauses, wiping it with particular care, and you realize that this part, the part no one sees, the part that touches only the tatami, is receiving the same reverence as the rim that touched your lips. The foot, he says, as if reading your thoughts, is where the potter's signature lives. Not a written signature, a fingerprint, a mark of the wheel, a slight irregularity that tells you this bowl was made by hands, not machines. Rikyū taught that the foot of the bowl is the most important part. It's humble, hidden, easy to ignore. But without it, the bowl would tip, would spill, would fail in its purpose. The foot is the foundation, and the foundation must be honored even when no one is looking. He finishes wiping and folds the fukusa with the same geometric precision he used to unfold it, the cloth returning to its original square as if it had never been touched. Then he sets it aside and reaches for the tea container, beginning the same process of purification. Wiping the lid, the body, the base, each movement a meditation on the nature of cleanliness and completion. You watch in silence, and you find yourself thinking about all the things you've done today without this level of attention. The way you brushed your teeth, the way you tied your shoes, the way you ate your breakfast while scrolling through headlines. You've been moving through your life like a ghost, your body performing actions while your mind was somewhere else entirely. Historians still argue whether the elaborate purification rituals in tea ceremony originated in Shinto concepts of cleanliness before approaching the gods, or whether they were practical responses to the realities of medieval Japan: soot from charcoal fires, dust from uncovered floors, the general grime of pre-modern life. What's certain is that by Rikyū's time, purification had become its own art form, a sequence of movements so precise that they could be taught, transmitted, preserved across generations. The way you wipe a bowl says something about who you are, about your training, about your relationship to the objects you handle. A careless wipe is a kind of violence. A careful wipe is a kind of love. The master sets the tea container down and reaches for the bamboo scoop, wiping it with a smaller cloth, one designed specifically for utensils. The scoop is tiny, barely larger than a pencil, but he treats it with the same reverence he's shown everything else, running the cloth along its length, cleaning the curve where the powder rests, polishing the tip that guides the tea into the bowl. When he's finished, he holds it up to the candlelight, turning it slowly, examining it for any trace of moisture or dust. Satisfied, he sets it beside the container, aligned perfectly with the edge of the tatami mat. "You notice the scoop," he says, "and you realize he's been aware of your attention throughout this entire process. Most people don't. It's small, easy to overlook. But the scoop is where the tea lives before it becomes tea. It holds the powder for a moment, transfers it from container to bowl, and then returns to emptiness. In that moment, the scoop is everything. It's the bridge between potential and actual, between what could be and what is. If the scoop is dirty, the tea is dirty. If the scoop is careless, the tea is careless. The scoop must be perfect because the tea must be perfect, and the tea must be perfect because you are here, and you deserve perfection." You feel a flush of something, embarrassment, maybe, or gratitude, at being included in this philosophy. You deserve perfection. Not the perfection of Instagram filters and carefully curated lives, but the perfection of a bamboo scoop wiped clean, of a bowl returned to its original state, of a moment prepared for you across decades and centuries. You've never thought of yourself as deserving anything except what you could earn, what you could pay for, what you could wrest from the world through effort and will. But here, in this hut, you're being given something you could never earn, the accumulated attention of generations, focused into a single act of welcome. The master reaches for the whisk now, and you watch as he examines its tines one by one, checking for damage, for wear, for any imperfection that might affect the next bowl of tea. The whisk is delicate, almost absurdly so. Dozens of thin bamboo strands held together by a tight wrap at the base, fanning out into a shape that reminds you of a flower or a burst of fireworks. He runs the fukusa gently between the tines, cleaning spaces so small you can barely see them, and you realize that this whisk, like everything else in this room, has a lifespan, a trajectory from new to worn to retired. A good whisk might last 100 ceremonies before the tines begin to break, before it must be replaced and the old one burned or buried or given a proper farewell. When I was a young man, Tanaka Soke says, still working on the whisk, I thought the goal was to make the tea perfectly. I practiced the movements until my hands bled, until I could perform the ceremony in my sleep. I competed with other students, trying to be faster, more precise, more correct. My teacher watched me for years, said nothing, let me exhaust myself in pursuit of a goal I didn't understand. Then one day, after a ceremony where I had executed every movement perfectly, he looked at me and said, the tea was terrible. You laugh before you can stop yourself, and the master's eyes crinkle again at the corners. I was angry, of course. I had done everything right, the water temperature, the whisking, the timing, all perfect. How could the tea be terrible? But he explained, you were thinking about the movements. You were performing the ceremony. But you weren't in the ceremony. Your body was here, but your mind was watching your body, judging it, comparing it to some ideal. The tea knew. The tea always knows. He sets the whisk down, aligned with the other utensils, and looks at you across the small space between you. That was the day I stopped trying to make perfect tea and started trying to make tea perfectly. Do you understand the difference? One is about the result, the product, the thing you can measure and judge. The other is about the process, the presence, the thing you can only experience. The perfect bowl of tea is a lie. It doesn't exist, can't exist, because perfection is static and tea is alive. But the perfectly made bowl of tea, that's real. That's possible. That's what the decades are for. The master's hand hovers over the utensils one final time, checking that everything is in its place, that nothing has been forgotten or misplaced in the choreography of purification. The bowl sits to his left, the tea container to his right, the scoop aligned precisely with the edge of the mat, the whisk parallel to the scoop, the fukusa folded and set aside. It looks like a photograph, like a museum display, like something that couldn't possibly exist in the messy, chaotic flow of real time. But it does exist, right here, right now, because a man spent 70 years learning to make it so. Tanaka Soke reaches for the bamboo scoop, but instead of using it, he simply holds it, turning it slowly in the candlelight so you can see its curve, its grain, the subtle darkening where decades of thumbs have rested. This scoop, he says, was made by my teacher's teacher. He carved it from a single piece of bamboo, cut from a grove in the mountains north of Kyoto. That grove has been there for 1,000 years, tended by the same family, passed down from father to son across 40 generations. The bamboo that became this scoop was planted by a man who died before Columbus sailed to America. It was cut by a man who watched the first Portuguese ships arrive in Japan. It was carved by a man who never left his village, never saw a city, never held anything in his hands except bamboo and the tools to shape it. He holds the scoop out to you, and you hesitate, unsure if you're allowed to touch it. He nods, and you reach out with both hands, taking the tiny utensil as carefully as you would take a wounded bird. It's lighter than you expected, almost weightless, and smooth. So smooth it feels like it's been polished by 1,000 years of use rather than the mere decades it has actually existed. You hold it up to the light, and you see what the master wants you to see. The grain of the bamboo, the nodes where leaves once grew, the slight curve that makes it perfect for scooping tea. You see, too, the marks of use. The darkening at the tip where powder has stained it, the slight wear at the base where fingers have held it, the tiny scratches that are less damages than memories. The scoop is called a chishaku, the master says. It's the most personal utensil in the ceremony. The bowl might be 400 years old, the kettle 5 generations in my family, but the scoop was made by someone I knew, someone I loved, someone who touched it and thought of me. When I use it, I'm not just making tea. I'm continuing a conversation that began before I was born, that will continue after I'm gone. The scoop is my teacher's teacher's voice, still speaking across the years. You think about that as you hold the tiny piece of bamboo in your palms. You think about the man who carved it, the man who planted the grove, the 1,000 years of attention that converged to create this moment. You, sitting on a floor in Kyoto, holding an object that contains more history than your entire country. It's humbling, is what it is. It makes you feel small, but not in the way that feeling small usually feels. This is a good smallness, a right smallness, the smallness of being part of something larger than yourself rather than being crushed by it. You hand the scoop back to the master, and he takes it with the same reverence you used to receive it. He sets it back in its place, aligned perfectly with the other utensils, and then he reaches for something new, a small ceramic container that you hadn't noticed before, tucked away in the shadows beside him. It's unglazed, rough, the color of clay pulled fresh from the earth, and when he opens it, you catch a whiff of something sweet, something that cuts through the smoke and tatami like a memory of childhood. Before the next tea, he says, we have something else. A small sweet, to prepare the palate. In Japan, we say that tea without sweets is like a garden without flowers. Possible, but why would you want to? He holds out the container, and you see inside a single small confection, shaped like a chrysanthemum, pale pink against the dark clay. Please. You reach for the sweet, and your fingers, clumsy after so much careful handling, nearly drop it. You catch it just in time, and you feel the master's amusement radiating across the space between you. The sweet is delicate, more delicate than anything you've ever held, and you bring it to your mouth with the same caution you'd use to approach a sleeping animal. It dissolves on your tongue almost instantly, a burst of sweetness that's somehow both intense and subtle, flavored with something you can't identify. Bean paste, maybe, and sugar, and a hint of something floral that might be the chrysanthemum it resembles. The sweets are called wagashi, the master says. They're made to reflect the season, the occasion, the guests. This one is autumn. The chrysanthemum is the flower of autumn. The color is the color of maple leaves beginning to turn. The person who made it woke at 3 this morning to shape it fresh, to ensure that when you ate it, it would be at exactly the right moment of freshness. She doesn't know you, will never meet you, but she thought about you as her hands shaped this flower. She wanted you to be happy. You sit with that for a moment, with the knowledge that a stranger you'll never meet woke before dawn to make you a sweet that lasted 3 seconds on your tongue. It seems absurd, excessive, almost insane in its generosity. And yet it's exactly of a piece with everything else that's happened tonight. The flower watched all day, the kettle listened to for generations, the bowl wiped with silk woven by a woman who died at 97. This is what the tea ceremony is. You realize. It's not about tea. It's about attention. It's about the radical, world-changing act of paying attention to one thing, one person, one moment, as if it mattered more than anything else in the universe. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of sweets in the tea ceremony was a practical addition. The bitter tea needed something to balance it, or a philosophical one, a reminder that life contains both bitterness and sweetness, that you can't have one without the other. Either way, by Riku's time, the sequence was fixed. sweet first, then tea, the contrast heightening both, making each more itself by its proximity to its opposite. You taste the last traces of sweetness on your tongue, and you realize that the tea, when it comes, will taste different now. More bitter, yes, but also more complex, more layered, more alive. The master reaches for the tea container again, and you watch as he repeats the movements you've seen before. Scoop, transfer, water, whisk, but something is different now. The sweetness on your tongue has changed your perception. Open something in you that was closed before. You notice details you missed earlier. The way the master's little finger lifts slightly as he scoops, the pause he makes before adding the water, the almost imperceptible nod he gives the bowl before he begins to whisk. Each gesture is a sentence in a language you're only beginning to learn, a vocabulary of attention that says, I am here. You are here. This moment is everything. When he presents the bowl this time, you take it without hesitation, your hands finding the correct positions as if by instinct. You turn it, feel its warmth, bring it to your lips. The tea is bitter, yes, but the bitterness is different now. Layered over the sweetness, contrasted with it, made more bitter by the memory of sugar and more sweet by the absence of it. You take your 3 sips, and between each one you pause, feeling the tea move through you, feeling yourself become part of the ceremony rather than just an observer of it. You set the bowl down, and the master reaches for it immediately, his hands closing around the warm ceramic with the same reverence they've shown everything tonight. But instead of beginning the purification ritual, he holds the bowl up to the candlelight, turning it slowly so that the flame plays across its surface. The glaze catches the light in ways you hadn't noticed before, deep greens and browns that shift and change as the angle moves, revealing textures that were invisible when the bowl was sitting flat. This bowl, Tanaka Soke says, was made in the 16th century by a potter named Chojiro. He worked in Riku's time, made bowls specifically for the tea ceremony, bowls that Riku himself designed and requested. Before Chojiro, tea bowls were imported from China and Korea. Beautiful, perfect, expensive. Riku wanted something different. He wanted bowls that felt like they came from Japan, from the earth itself, from the hands of local potters working with local clay. He wanted imperfection. You lean closer, studying the bowl as the master turns it. You see now what he means about imperfection. The bowl isn't perfectly round, isn't perfectly smooth, isn't perfectly anything. The glaze pools thicker in some places than others, the clay shows through in spots, the overall shape has a slight wobble that you can see when he rotates it. And yet, somehow, these imperfections don't make the bowl less beautiful. They make it more beautiful, more interesting, more alive. A perfect bowl would be boring, would have nothing to say. This bowl has been talking to you all night, and you're only now learning to hear it. The most important part, the master says, is here. He stops turning the bowl and holds it so the candlelight falls directly on one spot, a place where the glaze has cracked and darkened, forming a pattern that looks almost like a mountain range seen from above. This happened in the kill, during the firing. The heat was too high, or the clay was too wet, or the gods were simply in a playful mood. Most potters would have thrown this bowl away, would have seen this as a flaw, a failure. Chojiro saw it as a gift. He sent it to Riku anyway, and Riku loved it. He said the crack was where the fire entered the bowl, where the kill spirit made itself visible. He used this bowl for his most important ceremonies. You stare at the crack, this flaw that became a feature, this accident that became an essential element of the bowl's identity. You think about all the cracks in your own life, all the places where things didn't go according to plan, where you fell short of perfection, where you considered yourself damaged goods. What would it be like to see those cracks not as flaws but as gifts? What would it be like to show them to the world and say, this is where the fire entered me, this is where I became myself? The master sets the bowl down and reaches for another, a second bowl, smaller than the first, hidden behind the tea container where you hadn't noticed it. This one is completely different. Black glaze, almost rough to the touch, with a shape that's more angular, more severe. He holds it up, and you see that this bowl too has its imperfections. A small dent in the rim, a streak where the glaze ran, a patch of unglazed clay on the side. This bowl, he says, is from the same period, the same kiln, maybe even the same potter. But it has a different history. It was owned by a daimyo, a feudal lord, one of Hideyoshi's generals. He loved it too, but for different reasons. He saw in it the strength of a warrior, the austerity of a soldier's life. He used it to impress his guests, to show that he was a man of taste as well as power. After he died, it passed through many hands, many collections, many ceremonies. It was lost for 200 years, buried in a storage shed, forgotten. Then someone found it, recognized it, brought it back into use. It has been with my family for 4 generations. You look at the 2 bowls, side by side now, and you see how different they are, one warm and organic, one cold and severe. One marked by a single beautiful flaw, one scarred by centuries of neglect and rediscovery. And yet they're both here, both part of this ceremony, both worthy of the master's attention and yours. The tea ceremony doesn't choose between them, doesn't rank them, doesn't say one is better than the other. It simply makes space for both, honors both, lets each be exactly what it is. Which do you prefer? The master asks, and the question catches you off guard. You look at the bowls, really look at them, trying to feel your way toward an answer. The first bowl, the one with the crack, feels like an old friend now. You've drunk from it, held it, felt its warmth against your palms. The second bowl is a stranger, interesting but unknown. But is that preference? Is that a real choice? Or just familiarity? You point to the first bowl, and the master nods. Good, he says. That's the bowl I hoped you would choose. But if you had chosen the other, I would have said the same thing. The tea ceremony has no wrong answers, only different paths, different ways of seeing. The bowl you prefer tells me something about you, about your nature, about the kind of beauty that speaks to your soul. That information is valuable, but it's not a judgment. It's just data, just another layer of the conversation we're having. He sets the second bowl aside and picks up the first again, holding it out to you. Take it. Look at it closely. Find its face. You take the bowl, and you do what he says. You look at it, really look, letting your eyes wander across its surface without trying to analyze or judge. And after a moment, you see it, a place on the rim where the glaze forms a slightly different pattern. A spot that seems to look back at you, that feels like the front. You turn the bowl so that spot is facing you, and you show it to the master. He smiles. That small smile you're beginning to recognize and treasure. Yes, he says. That's its face. Every bowl has one. But you have to find it yourself. No one can tell you where it is. You have to look, to feel, to listen to what the bowl is telling you. And the bowl is always telling you. You just have to learn to hear. You hold the bowl for a long moment, feeling its weight, its warmth, its ancient presence in your hands. You think about all the people who have held it before you, Rikyu, maybe, and Chojiro, and generations of tea masters and their guests, all of them finding this same face, this same spot that looks back at them across the centuries. You're part of that chain now, part of that conversation. The bowl knows you, has added you to its memory, will remember your hands long after you're gone. Historians still argue whether the Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection and impermanence, originated in the tea ceremony or simply found its fullest expression there. Some trace it to Buddhist concepts of enlightenment, to the idea that attachment to perfection is a form of suffering. Others see it as a practical response to limited resources, a way of making do with what you had rather than yearning for what you couldn't afford. Whatever its origins, wabi-sabi became the heart of the tea ceremony. the philosophy that turned cracks into features and flaws into fingerprints. A perfect bowl would be a bowl without a soul. An imperfect bowl is a bowl that has lived. You're still holding the bowl when you notice something shift in the room. A change so subtle you almost miss it, but once registered, it's impossible to ignore. The candle has burned down considerably since you last noticed it, the flame now dancing in a pool of liquid wax at the bottom of its iron holder. The shadows in the room have deepened, grown longer, the corners retreating further into darkness. Time has been passing while you weren't watching, while you were lost in bowls and cracks and centuries of attention. Tanaka Soke follows your gaze to the candle and nods, acknowledging that you've noticed. The candle, he says, is also part of the ceremony. It was made by hand, in a temple north of here, from beeswax gathered in the mountains. It burns for exactly 4 hours, the length of a full tea ceremony. When it reaches this point, we know we are entering the final phase. The guests know, without being told, that the end is approaching. They have time for one more bowl, one more conversation, one more moment of presence before they must crawl back through the small door and return to the world. He reaches for the tea container again, but this time his movements are slightly different. Slower, more deliberate, as if he's savoring each gesture rather than simply performing it. The scoop dips into the powder, transfers it to the bowl, and you watch the green mound settle into the ceramic with a sense of finality, of conclusion. This is the last bowl, the last tea, the last chance to be here in this moment before it becomes memory. But before he adds the water, the master pauses and looks at you directly. "The sweets we had earlier," he says. "You ate it without asking what it was." That's correct. In the tea ceremony, you don't ask, you don't analyze, you simply receive. But now, at the end, I will tell you. That sweet was made from white bean paste and sugar, shaped to look like a chrysanthemum, flavored with a tiny drop of plum essence. The woman who made it has been making sweets for 60 years. She learned from her mother, who learned from her mother, who learned from a man in the Edo period who started the tradition. That sweet contained within it the labor of generations, the knowledge of centuries, the love of strangers who wanted you to taste something beautiful before you died. Before you died. The phrase hangs in the air between you, and you realize he's not being morbid, he's being honest. The tea ceremony has always been aware of death, has always known that this moment, like every moment, is borrowed from an ending. The candle burning down, the flower reaching its peak, the bowl with its beautiful crack, all of them reminders that nothing lasts, that everything fades, that the only appropriate response to impermanence is full attention. The master adds the water, whisks the tea, and presents the bowl. You take it with both hands, and this time you don't think about etiquette or correctness. You simply receive, simply hold, simply bring it to your lips. The tea tastes different again, deeper somehow, richer, as if all the accumulated meaning of the evening has condensed into this final sip. You take it slowly, one sip at a time, and between sips you look around the room, at the kettle, the utensils, the flower in the alcove, the master's ancient face in the candlelight. You're trying to memorize it, to fix it in your mind so you can carry it with you when you leave. But even as you try to hold on to it, you know you can't. The memory will fade, the details will blur, the feeling will become something you once had rather than something you are. That's what the tea ceremony knows, that you're only beginning to learn, that the beauty is in the moment itself, not in its preservation. Trying to keep it is like trying to keep the foam on the tea, a futile gesture that misses the point entirely. You finish the last sip and set the bowl down, rotating it back toward the master. He bows, and you bow in return, and then he begins the final purification. Wiping each utensil, returning each to its place, preparing them for the next ceremony, the next guest, the next moment of attention. You watch him work, and you notice that his movements are even slower now, even more deliberate, as if he's stretching time itself to delay the inevitable ending. The final act of the ceremony, he says without looking up, is the host and guest bowing to each other one last time. Then the guest crawls out through the small door, and the host watches from inside until the sound of the guest's footsteps fades into the distance. The host doesn't follow, doesn't wave goodbye, doesn't call out. He simply listens, letting the guest disappear into the world, carrying with him whatever the ceremony gave him. You sit with that image for a moment. You, walking away through the dark garden, and the master, kneeling alone in the candlelight, listening to your footsteps fade. It's a lonely image, but also a generous one. He's not trying to hold on to you, not trying to extend the moment beyond its natural life. He's letting you go, fully and completely, because that's what the ceremony requires. The guest must leave. The host must remain. The separation is as much a part of the ritual as the joining. Before you go, the master says, there's one more thing. He reaches into the folds of his kimono and produces something small, wrapped in a piece of silk. He unwraps it carefully, and you see that it's a tea scoop, not the one he's been using, but a different one, smaller and simpler, carved from what looks like cherry wood rather than bamboo. He holds it out to you. This is for you, he says. It was carved by my teacher, for his students, to give to guests who showed understanding. There are not many of these in the world. I have given only 3 in my lifetime. You are the 4th. You stare at the scoop, this tiny piece of carved wood that represents something you can barely comprehend. You want to refuse, to say you don't deserve it, that you're just a tourist, just someone who showed up and drank tea and tried not to make too many mistakes. But you know, somehow, that refusing would be an insult, that the master has seen something in you, recognized something, and that your job now is simply to receive. You take the scoop with both hands, holding it as carefully as you've held everything tonight. It's warm from being next to his body, and it has a faint smell of incense, of years of ceremonies, of attention accumulated like dust on a shelf. You look at it, and you see the marks of the carver's knife, the slight asymmetry that makes it alive, the polished curve where thumbs have rested for decades. This scoop has been in ceremonies you'll never attend, has touched tea you'll never taste, has been held by hands that turned to dust long before you were born. And now it's yours. You hold the scoop in your palm, this unexpected gift that feels heavier than its physical weight could possibly justify, and you realize you have no idea what to do with it. Do you bow? Thank him? Put it in your pocket? The master watches you with that same patient expression, giving you space to figure it out for yourself, and after a moment you settle on a deep bow, the scoop held in front of you like an offering. It feels right, or right enough, and when you look up, the master's eyes are doing that crinkling thing that means he's pleased. The scoop, he says, is called a chishaku, as you know. But each scoop also has a name, a poetic name, given by the maker or the first owner. This one is called matsukeis, the same as the sound of the kettle. Wind in the pines. My teacher named it that because he carved it from wood taken from a tree that grew on a mountainside where the wind always blew. He said the tree spent its whole life learning to move with the wind, to bend without breaking, to sing when the air passed through its branches. When he carved it into a scoop, he tried to keep that song alive in the wood. You look at the scoop with new eyes, seeing now the grain that you noticed before but didn't understand. It does look like wind, like movement frozen in time, like the memory of 1,000 storms captured in a curve of wood. You run your thumb along its length, feeling the smoothness that decades of use have created, and you wonder if you can feel the wind too, if the tree's song is still there, waiting for someone with ears to hear it. When you use this scoop, the master continues, you will be continuing its story. Every time you dip it into tea, every time you transfer powder to bowl, you will be adding your own chapter to a narrative that began on a mountainside centuries ago. The scoop will remember you, will carry your attention forward to whoever holds it next. That's the responsibility of owning a tea utensil, not possessing it, but caring for it, adding to its history, passing it on to the next person who will understand. You feel the weight of that responsibility settling onto your shoulders, and it's both terrifying and exhilarating. You've owned things before, lots of things, cars and computers and clothes and books, but you've never thought of any of them as having a story, as carrying meaning beyond their utility. This scoop is different. This scoop expects something from you. This scoop will judge you, in its silent wooden way, by how well you honor the centuries that preceded your brief moment in its existence. The master reaches for the kettle one last time, lifting it from the brazier and setting it on the iron lid rest. The coals beneath it have burned low now, reduced to a soft orange glow that barely illuminates the underside of the pot. The ceremony is truly ending, winding down like the candle, like the day, like everything that has a beginning and an end. You watch as he rearranges the utensils one final time, returning them to their original positions, erasing the evidence of the past 4 hours until the room looks exactly as it did when you crawled through the small door. Rikyū, the master says softly, taught that the tea ceremony is not about creating something new, but about returning to something old. The utensils are arranged the same way every time. The movements are the same every time. The sequence is the same every time. And yet every ceremony is completely different, completely new, completely itself. Do you understand how that can be? You think about it, about the paradox of repetition producing uniqueness, about the way the same notes played by different musicians become different songs, about the fact that you've sat here for 4 hours and yet the time has flown like minutes. Because you're different, you say slowly. Because every time you do it, you're a different person. The ceremony stays the same, but you change, so the ceremony changes with you. The master nods, and this time the smile is fuller, warmer. Yes, that's exactly it. The ceremony is a mirror. It shows you who you are today, who you are in this moment, who you have become since the last time you looked. A lifetime of practice isn't about perfecting the ceremony. It's about watching yourself change through the ceremony. The tea is always the same. You are always different. That's why a master can spend decades learning one pour and never get bored, never finish, never arrive at a destination. The pour is infinite because you are infinite. You sit with that for a moment, with the idea that your own infinite complexity is what makes the simple act of pouring water endlessly fascinating. You've spent your whole life looking outward, looking for novelty in the world, assuming that the interesting stuff was out there, beyond the horizon, in places you hadn't been and experiences you hadn't had. But the master is telling you that the interesting stuff is in here, inside you, in the subtle shifts of attention and awareness that transform the same action into a lifetime of discovery. Before you go, the master says, I want you to try something. He gestures to the space in front of him, where he's been kneeling all evening. Come here. Sit where I sit. Hold the scoop, your scoop, Matsuke's, and pour water into the bowl. You hesitate, because this feels wrong somehow, like asking an apprentice to conduct the symphony or a student to perform surgery. But the master's expression is patient, expectant, and you realize this is part of the gift. Not just the scoop, but the chance to try, to fail, to learn what the decades are really for. You move to his position, settling onto the cushion that still holds the warmth of his body, and you look at the arrangement of utensils from this new perspective. It's different from here. The angles changed, the relationships between objects shifted. The kettle is closer, the bowl farther, the whole geometry of the ceremony reoriented around your body. You take Matsuke's in your hand, and it feels different too, more alive, more responsive, as if it knows it's finally being used for its purpose. You look at the kettle, at the steam still rising from its spout, and you remember everything the master has shown you tonight. The importance of temperature, the sound of the water, the way the ladle must be warmed before it touches the liquid. Your hand reaches for the ladle, and you dip it into the steam, holding it there as you've seen him do, waiting for the bamboo to absorb the heat. Then you scoop the water, transfer it to the bowl, and watch as the hot liquid swirls and settles. It's not perfect. Your hand trembled slightly, the water splashed a little, the whole movement lacked the grace that 70 years of practice confer. But it's yours. It's your pour, your moment, your first step into a practice that could occupy the rest of your life if you let it. You set the ladle down and look at the master, and his nodding, that small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Good, he says. You've begun. The rest is just practice. You're still holding Matsuke's, the scoop warm in your palm from the contact with steam and water, when you notice the master looking at something behind you. You turn, following his gaze, and see that the flower in the tokonoma has changed while you weren't watching. The bud that was tight and closed when you arrived has begun to open, its petals unfurling slowly in the candlelight, revealing the deeper pink at its heart. The camellia is becoming something new, right here in front of you, in the final moments of the ceremony. The flower, the master says softly, has been waiting for this. All day it held itself closed, waiting for the right moment, the right audience, the right conditions to begin its unfolding. It knew you were coming, somehow, not you specifically, but a guest, a witness, someone to see it become itself. Flowers don't bloom in empty rooms. They bloom for the eyes that will receive them. You stare at the camellia, this ordinary flower that has suddenly become extraordinary, and you feel the tears prick at the corners of your eyes. You don't cry, you're not a crier, haven't cried in years, but something shifts inside you, some locked door opening just a crack, letting in a light you didn't know you were missing. The flower is blooming for you. The flower has been waiting all day to show you this moment, this transformation, this proof that even the smallest things contain mysteries. The tea ceremony, the master continues, is often called chado, the way of tea. Not the art of tea, not the practice of tea, but the way. In Japanese, do means path, means road, means a journey that has no destination. You don't arrive at the way of tea, you walk it, your whole life, step by step, ceremony by ceremony, pour by pour. The flower understands this. It doesn't try to stay in bud forever, doesn't try to preserve its beauty unchanged. It opens, it blooms, it fades, it falls. That's its way. That's its tea ceremony. You think about your own life, your own path, the way you've been walking without ever really noticing the walking. You've had destinations, jobs to get, places to reach, goals to achieve, but you've never had a way, never had a practice that was about the walking itself rather than the arriving. The tea ceremony is offering you something. You realize. Not a new hobby or a new skill, but a new way of being in the world, a new relationship to time and attention and the simple acts that fill your days. The master reaches for the bowl you just used, the bowl you poured water into, your first clumsy attempt at participation, and he begins to purify it, wiping it with the fukusa as carefully as he's wiped every bowl tonight. But this time, when he finishes, he holds it out to you. Look, he says. Look at the water you poured. You lean forward, and you see what he means. The bowl is empty now, but the water you poured has left its trace, a slight dampness on the ceramic, a darkening of the glaze where the liquid touched it. In a few minutes, it will evaporate completely, leaving no sign that you were ever here, that you ever held the scoop or poured the water. But right now, in this moment, the evidence remains. Your presence is recorded on the surface of a 400-year-old bowl. This is what the tea ceremony teaches, the master says. That every action leaves a trace, however temporary. That you matter, even when your mattering is invisible. That the water you pour today will evaporate, but the fact that you poured it, the attention you brought to the act, the presence you brought to the moment, that remains. Not in the bowl, not in the world, but in you. In the person you become by having paid attention. He sets the bowl down and looks at you across the small space between you. The candle is guttering now, the flame low and desperate, casting long shadows that dance across the walls. The ceremony is almost over. You can feel it in the air, in the cooling of the kettle, in the way the master's movements have slowed to almost nothing. In a few minutes, you will crawl back through the small door, and this room will return to silence, waiting for the next guest, the next ceremony, the next moment of attention. But before that, the master has one more thing to show you. He reaches into the folds of his kimono again and produces a small wooden box, plain and unadorned, worn smooth by decades of handling. He opens it carefully and reveals inside a single sheet of paper, old and fragile, covered in brushstrokes that you recognize as calligraphy. He lifts it out with the same reverence he's shown every object tonight and holds it so you can see. "This is Riku's death poem," he says quietly. "The one he wrote on the morning of his suicide, before his final ceremony, before his friends came to say goodbye. It's a copy, of course. The original is in a museum in Tokyo, but it was made by my teacher's teacher, who saw the original and copied it stroke for stroke, trying to capture not just the words but the feeling, the trembling, the presence of a man facing his end." You look at the poem, at the characters that you can't read but can feel. The brush strokes are uneven, wavering, full of the same tremors you saw in the monk's calligraphy hours ago. This is a man writing on the last morning of his life, knowing that by evening he will be dead, and the brush in his hand is shaking, just a little, because even a tea master who has spent decades learning one pour is still human, still afraid, still attached to the world he's about to leave. The poem says, the master translates softly, "Though my body departs, my tea remains. In the steam of the kettle, in the foam on the bowl, in the hearts of those who remember, I am still here." Riku knew he was going to die, but he also knew that what he had created couldn't be killed. The way of tea would outlast him, would outlast Hideyoshi, would outlast everyone who ever lived. And it has. 400 years later, we're still here, still pouring water, still paying attention. Riku is in this room with us right now. Can you feel him? You close your eyes, and you try. You feel the warmth of the dying candle, the coolness of the tatami beneath you, the weight of Matsuke's still in your hand. You hear the last whispers of steam from the cooling kettle, the distant sound of wind in the cedars outside, the soft rhythm of the master's breathing across from you. And somewhere, beneath all of that, you feel something else, a presence, a tension, a patience that isn't quite yours. It's Riku, you realize. Or not Riku exactly, but what Riku made possible. The space he created for attention to happen. The permission he gave to care deeply about small things. You open your eyes, and the master is watching you, that small smile on his face. "You felt it," he says. "It's not a question." You nod, and he nods back, and for a long moment you simply sit there, together, feeling the ghost of a man who died 4 centuries ago watching over you both. The candle flickers one last time and goes out, plunging the room into darkness so complete it feels solid, like something you could reach out and touch. You don't move, don't speak, don't even breathe for a long moment, letting the absence of light settle around you like a blanket. And then, slowly, your eyes begin to adjust, and you realize it's not completely dark after all. A thin sliver of moonlight is finding its way through a crack in the wall, painting a silver line across the tatami between you and the master. In that faint illumination, you can just make out Tanaka Soke's silhouette, still as a statue, his breathing so shallow you can't hear it at all. He's waiting for something, you realize, waiting for you to adjust, to settle, to find your way in this new darkness. The ceremony isn't over just because the candle died. The ceremony continues as long as you're both here, as long as there's attention to pay and presence to maintain. After a long moment, the master speaks, his voice even softer than before, barely above a whisper. "In the old days," he says, "ceremonies were often held by moonlight, or by the light of a single lantern, or in complete darkness like this. Riku preferred it this way. No distractions, no separation between the guests, just the sound of the kettle and the presence of each other. In darkness, you can't see the cracks in the bowl, can't see the imperfections in the calligraphy, can't see the age in your host's face. All you have is the moment itself, stripped of everything but its own existence. You sit in the darkness, feeling the truth of his words. Without the candle, the room has become something else, not a space you observe, but a space you inhabit, a space that wraps around you like water. You can feel the presence of the utensils even though you can't see them, can sense the flower in the alcove even though it's invisible, can almost hear the bowl breathing somewhere in the blackness. The tea ceremony has become purely internal now, a meditation rather than a performance, a conversation between you and yourself. You've done well tonight, the master says, and you can hear the smile in his voice even though you can't see it. Better than most. But I want you to understand something before you leave. He pauses, and you wait, knowing that whatever comes next will be important. The tea ceremony is not a refuge from the world. It's not a place to hide, not an escape from the difficulties of life. It's a training ground, a place to practice the attention you'll need out there, in the world, where everything is chaotic and nothing is controlled. The peace you feel here is not the point. The point is to carry that peace with you when you leave. You think about that, about the life waiting for you outside this hut, the emails and deadlines and notifications, the rush and noise and constant demand for your attention. You've spent the last 4 hours learning to be present, learning to notice the foam on the tea and the crack in the bowl and the flower blooming in the alcove. But what good is that attention when you're back in your real life, back in the chaos you came from? How do you carry a tea ceremony through an airport? The answer, the master says, as if reading your thoughts, is practice. Not practice here, in this room, but practice everywhere. Practice pouring your morning coffee with the same attention you used tonight. Practice noticing the steam rising from your cup, the warmth of the ceramic against your palms, the bitterness of the first sip. Practice being present for the small moments, the ordinary moments, the moments you usually sleep through. That's what the decades are for, not to perfect the ceremony, but to perfect the attention you bring to every moment of your life. You sit with that, letting it sink in, letting it settle into the places where you normally carry your distractions and your haste. You think about all the mornings you've rushed through, all the cups of coffee you've consumed without tasting, all the moments you've let slip away while your mind was somewhere else. What would it be like to live differently? What would it be like to bring this quality of attention to everything? To washing dishes, to tying shoes, to walking down the street. The master is always watching, Tanaka Soke continues, his voice soft in the darkness. Not me, I won't be there. But the master inside you, the one you've been training tonight, the one who noticed the foam and found the bowl's face and felt Riku's presence in this room. That master will be watching. And every time you pay attention, every time you choose presence over distraction, that master grows stronger. Every time you choose distraction, that master weakens. The choice is always yours, in every moment, until the day you die. You feel the weight of that choice settling onto your shoulders, and it's both terrifying and liberating. You've spent your life thinking that change was something that happened to you, something you waited for or hoped for or occasionally tried to force. But the master is telling you that change happens in moments, in choices, in the tiny decisions you make thousands of times a day without even noticing. The person you become is simply the sum of all those choices, all those moments of attention or distraction, all those times you chose to be present or let yourself drift away. Outside, you hear the first birds begin to stir, a tentative chirp that grows into a chorus as the darkness slowly, imperceptibly, begins to fade toward dawn. You've been here all night. You've been in this hut for hours, and you had no idea, no sense of time passing, no awareness of anything except this moment, this conversation, this darkness filled with presence. That's what attention does. You realize. It stops time. It collapses the past and future into a single point of awareness, a single moment that contains everything. The sun will rise soon, the master says. The flower will finish opening. The birds will sing their morning song. And you will crawl through the small door and return to your life. But before you go, I want you to promise me something. You wait, not trusting your voice. Promise me you'll make tea tomorrow morning. Not instant tea, not tea from a bag, real tea, with a real bowl, with real attention. And when you drink it, remember this room, remember this night, remember that you are capable of this kind of presence. And then do it again the next day. And the next. And the next. That's all. That's everything. That's the way. The darkness is definitely fading now, the thin line of moonlight on the tatami slowly broadening into a pale grey glow that reveals the shapes of things without yet showing their details. You can see the outline of the kettle, the curve of the bowl, the dark rectangle of the tokonoma where the flower sits in its final moments of blooming. The room is returning to itself, emerging from the night like a photograph developing. And with it comes the awareness that you really do have to leave soon. Tanaka Soke hasn't moved since the candle went out, but now he stirs, a slight shift in his posture that tells you he's preparing for the end. His hands come together in his lap, and he bows slightly toward the space where the utensils sit, a final gesture of thanks to the objects that have served you both so well tonight. Then he turns to you, and even in the dim light you can see his eyes, dark and deep and full of something you can't quite name. In a moment, he says, you will crawl through the door and return to your world. But before you do, I want to tell you one more story, a story about my teacher, and about the first time I tried to pour tea. You settle back onto your cushion, grateful for any extension of this night, any delay before you have to re-enter the life waiting outside. I was 17 years old when I came to my teacher. The master begins. Young, arrogant, convinced that I already understood everything worth understanding. I had read books about tea ceremony, had watched demonstrations, had practiced the movements in my room until I could perform them perfectly. I thought I was ready. I thought the decades of practice were for slower people, less talented people, people who didn't have my natural ability. I arrived at my teacher's door with my perfect movements and my perfect knowledge and my perfect arrogance, and I waited for him to be impressed. He pauses, and you can hear the self-mockery in his voice, the awareness of his younger self's folly. My teacher watched me perform the ceremony once. Just once. When I finished, proud of my execution, he looked at me for a long moment and then said, "That was very good. Now do it again, but this time, don't move." I didn't understand. How could I perform the ceremony without moving? I asked him to explain, and he said, "You're moving too much. Your body is full of unnecessary motion. Tension here, adjustment there, correction everywhere. You're so busy performing that you're not actually doing anything. So do it again, but this time, don't move. Let the ceremony move through you." You think about that, about the paradox of performing an action without moving, about the difference between doing something and letting something happen through you. It sounds like Zen koan, like a riddle designed to break your mind so something truer can emerge. And maybe that's exactly what it was. It took me 3 years, the master continues, to understand what he meant. 3 years of practicing the same movements, the same sequence, the same ceremony, over and over and over. 3 years of my teacher telling me, every time, "You're still moving. You're still trying. You're still performing." 3 years of frustration, of tears, of wanting to quit and become a fisherman like my father wanted me to be. And then one day, something shifted. I was doing the ceremony, the same ceremony I'd done 1,000 times, and suddenly I wasn't doing it anymore. It was doing me. The movement happened without my deciding, the water poured without my willing it, the tea whisked itself through my hands. And when I finished, my teacher looked at me and smiled and said, "Now you can begin." The first real light of dawn is beginning to seep through the cracks in the walls now, painting pale gold lines across the tatami. You can see the master's face clearly for the first time since the candle died, and you notice something you missed before, a softness around his eyes, a gentleness in his expression, that wasn't there when you arrived. The ceremony has changed him too, you realize. Not in any dramatic way, but in the way that any real encounter changes both people, leaves them slightly different than they were before. That's what the decades are for, he says. Not to master the ceremony, but to be mastered by it. Not to learn the movements, but to become the movements. Not to pour tea, but to let tea pour you. It sounds like nonsense, I know. It sounded like nonsense to me for years. But now, at the end of my life, I understand. The tea ceremony is not something you do. It's something you become. And becoming takes time. It takes decades. It takes a lifetime. It takes everything you have and gives nothing back except itself. You think about your own life, your own pursuits, your own attempts to master things. You've learned skills, acquired knowledge, achieved goals. But you've never let anything master you, never surrendered to a practice so completely that it became part of your identity. You've always held something back, always kept a little distance, always maintained the ability to walk away. And now, sitting in this dawn-lit hut with a man who has given everything to tea, you wonder what that distance has cost you. When you leave here, the master says, you will take matsukes with you. You will make tea tomorrow morning, and the next day, and the next. And for a while, it will be easy. The memory of tonight will carry you, will remind you what attention feels like. But then the memory will fade, and the practice will become hard, and you will be tempted to stop, to go back to your old ways, to let the tea grow cold while you check your phone. That's when the real practice begins. That's when you find out if you're serious. That's when you become a tea master or just someone who once had an interesting night in Kyoto. He pauses, and his eyes meet yours with an intensity that makes you want to look away but you can't. I will be dead when that happens, he says quietly. My teacher is already dead. His teacher is dead. Everyone who taught us is dead. But the tea isn't dead. The tea is waiting for you, every morning, every time you choose to pay attention. The tea doesn't care if you're good at it. The tea doesn't care if you understand it. The tea just wants you to show up, to be present, to pour with whatever attention you can muster. That's enough. That's always been enough. The light has definitely arrived now, pale and golden, filling the small hut with a warmth that feels almost physical. You can see every detail of the room, the grain of the wooden posts, the weave of the tatami, the subtle variations in the clay walls. The flower in the tokonoma is fully open now, its petals spread wide to catch the morning light, and you realize that in a few hours it will begin to fade, its perfect moment already passing even as you watch. That's what the tea ceremony has been about all along, you understand now. Not capturing the moment, but witnessing it. Not holding on, but letting go. Tanaka Soke rises slowly, his old body unfolding with the same deliberate grace he's shown all night. You rise too, your legs stiff from hours of kneeling, and you stand together in the center of the room, facing each other across the small space where so much has happened. The utensils sit between you, arranged in their perfect order, waiting for the next ceremony, the next guest, the next moment of attention. They look different in the daylight, less mysterious, more ordinary, but somehow that makes them more beautiful, not less. They're just things, you realize. Just bowls and scoops and a kettle. And they're everything. The master bows, and you bow in return, a deep bow that holds for a long moment. When you straighten, his eyes are wet, just slightly, and you feel your own throat tighten in response. You haven't known this man for even a full day, And yet you feel closer to him than you do to people you've known for years. That's what attention does, you think. That's what presence creates. A connection that bypasses all the usual channels and goes straight to something deeper, something truer. Go now, he says softly. The door is small, but you know how to crawl through it. The garden is beautiful in the morning, the dew on the moss, the light through the cedars, the birds singing their gratitude for another day. Walk slowly. Notice everything. And when you reach the stone basin, rinse your hands one last time. The water will be cold, and it will taste of roots and minerals and the memory of this night. Drink it slowly. Let it remind you. You want to say something. Thank you, goodbye, something that captures even a fraction of what you're feeling. But the words won't come, and you realize they don't need to. The master understands. He's been doing this for 70 years. He knows what guests feel when they leave. He knows that words are just noise, that the silence between you says everything that matters. You turn toward the small door, and you get down on your hands and knees for the last time. The crawl space is just as tight as it was when you arrived, just as dark, just as uncomfortable, but this time it feels different. This time you're not crawling into something. You're crawling out of something. You're leaving behind not just a hut, but a way of being, a version of yourself that didn't know what attention really meant. The person who crawled in 4 hours ago is not the same person crawling out. The tea ceremony has changed you, subtly but surely, in ways you won't fully understand for years. You emerge into the garden, and the light hits you like a physical force after the darkness of the hut. You blink, your eyes adjusting, and slowly the world resolves itself into colors and shapes and movements. The moss is indeed wet with dew, each tiny plant holding a droplet that catches the light like a jewel. The cedars tower above you, their trunks massive and ancient, their needles dark against the pale blue sky. Birds are singing everywhere, a chaotic chorus that somehow resolves into harmony, each voice finding its place in the larger song. You walk slowly, as the master instructed, along the stone path back toward the outer world. Your legs are stiff, your body tired, but your mind is clearer than it's been in years. You notice everything, the way the light filters through the trees, the texture of the moss under your feet, the sound of a distant stream you didn't hear when you arrived. You notice the small things, the ordinary things, the things you've been walking past your whole life without ever really seeing. The stone basin appears ahead of you, just where you left it, the water still and clear in the morning light. You crouch beside it, your knees protesting, and you take the bamboo ladle in your hands. You rinse your left hand, then your right, then you cup water in your palm and bring it to your lips. The water is cold, shockingly so, and it tastes of roots and minerals and something else, something that tastes like the memory of tea, like the presence of an old man in a dark hut, like the beginning of a practice that could last the rest of your life. You dry your hands on the cloth beside the basin, and you stand, looking back toward the hut. It's just a small building, really, barely visible through the trees, its thatched roof blending into the forest like it grew there. Smoke rises from a crack in the roof. The master banked the charcoal, letting the fire die slowly, preparing for the next ceremony. You watch the smoke rise and disappear into the blue sky, and you think about Riku's death poem, about the steam that carries his presence forward through the centuries. The master is in there, alone now, listening to your footsteps fade, just as he said he would be. You want to go back, to thank him again, to tell him what this night has meant. But you know that would be wrong. The ceremony is over. The guest must leave. The host must remain. That's the way. You turn and continue down the path, and with each step the hut recedes further into the forest, further into memory, further into the person you're becoming. You reach the gate at the edge of the garden, and you pause there, one hand on the weathered wood, looking back one last time. You can't see the hut anymore, just trees, just moss, just the path disappearing into green shadow. But you can feel it, somehow. You can feel the master sitting there in the dawn light, surrounded by his utensils, waiting for the next guest, the next ceremony, the next moment of attention that will carry request forward for another generation. You push open the gate, and you step through into the world. The street is quiet at this hour, just a few early risers walking their dogs, a delivery truck rumbling in the distance. You check your phone, dead, of course, hours ago, and you realize you have no idea what time it is, what day it is, what you're supposed to be doing next. And for once, that's okay. For once, you're not in a hurry. For once, you have nowhere to be except here, now, walking through a quiet Kyoto street in the early morning, carrying a small bamboo scoop in your pocket and a lifetime of attention waiting to be practiced. You find a small cafe around the corner from your hotel, the kind of place you would have walked past yesterday without a second glance. Today you stop, you go in, you order tea. It's not matcha, it's just ordinary green tea, served in an ordinary ceramic cup. But you hold it in both hands anyway, feeling its warmth, watching the steam rise. You take a sip, and it's bitter, and it's perfect, and for a moment you're back in the hut, back in the darkness, back in the presence of a man who spent decades learning one pour. You drink your tea slowly, one sip at a time, and when you're done you set the cup down and bow to it, just slightly, just enough. The woman behind the counter gives you a strange look, and you smile at her, and you don't explain. Some things can't be explained. Some things can only be lived. The cafe grows quiet around you as the morning light continues its slow climb over the rooftops of Kyoto. You sit with your empty cup, your hand still wrapped around its warmth, and you let the past 4 hours settle into your bones like heat from a fire. The tea is gone, but something remains, a stillness in your chest, a quietness in your mind, a sense that the world has shifted slightly on its axis and will never quite return to its previous alignment. You think about Tanaka Soke, alone now in his hut, probably preparing for the next ceremony, the next guest, the next opportunity to pour tea for someone who needs it. You think about the bowl you drank from, the scoop you now carry in your pocket, the flower that bloomed in the darkness and will fade by afternoon. You think about Rikyū, dead these 400 years, still present in every ceremony, every pour, every moment of attention paid by someone who remembers. And you think about yourself, about the life you'll return to, about the challenge of carrying this night forward into all the ordinary days that await. The woman behind the counter brings you a small plate of something sweet. A gesture, you realize, a welcome to a stranger sitting alone in her cafe at dawn. You thank her, and you eat it slowly, noticing the texture, the flavor, the way it dissolves on your tongue. It's just a sweet, just a small kindness from a stranger, but you receive it with the same attention you brought to the wagashi in the tea hut. You're practicing already, without even deciding to. The night has become part of you. When you finally leave the cafe, the city is fully awake, shops opening, people hurrying to work, the constant hum of a metropolis beginning its daily dance. You walk through it slowly, deliberately, letting the crowd flow around you like water around a stone. Your phone is still dead, and you don't care. Your emails can wait. Your deadlines can wait. Everything can wait except this moment, this walk, this morning light on ancient streets. Back in your hotel room, you unpack the small wooden box the master gave you, the one containing matsukes. You hold the scoop in your hands, turning it slowly in the light from the window, watching the grain shift and flow like wind through pines. You set it on the small table by the window, and you sit across from it, just looking, just being present with this object that contains so much history, so much attention, so much love. And then, because you promised, because it's the next step on a path you've just begun to walk, you make tea. Not with the proper utensils, not in a proper ceremony, just hot water from the electric kettle, just a tea bag from the hotel's complimentary basket, just an ordinary ceramic mug. But you make it with attention. You watch the steam rise, feel the warmth through the mug, taste the bitterness of the first sip. And for a moment, just a moment, you're back in the hut, back in the darkness, back in the presence of something larger than yourself. The tea is ordinary. The moment is extraordinary. And that, you finally understand, is the whole point. The sun continues its climb, the city continues its hustle, and you continue your practice. One cup at a time, one moment at a time, one breath at a time. The master's voice fades into memory, the hut recedes into the past. The night becomes a story you'll tell and retell until it becomes legend. But the tea remains. The practice remains. The attention remains. And somewhere in Kyoto, in a small hut hidden among cedars, an old man kneels before his kettle, waiting for the next guest, the next ceremony, the next chance to pour tea for someone who needs to remember what attention feels like. The steam rises, the kettle sings, and Riku's ghost smiles in the darkness. Tonight, you walked into a tea hut. Tomorrow, you'll walk into the rest of your life. And between now and then, there will be tea.